First step in doing advanced training is to prepare the board. And so I prefer to use medieval tools that I've made to prepare the boards, just because the authenticity. But I really like the precision of power tools. So I actually cut most of the boards using some power tools. I did do a lot of hand work, specifically planing it down to thickness and cleaning things up. You can see me here using this low-laying bench to actually continue thickness planing this board. But genuinely, that is the end of the power tools that I use. This is actually the spare board. I'm demonstrating how it would be done. Edge planing would be to square the board up and get it to the right width. But I have the boards that I prepped using the power tools. Now all the rest from here on really did use hand tools. And so there's this block plane that I made that I'm using to round all of the edges and all the corners to shape and chamfer the boards. So then I continue to do the same thing on all four sides of both boards. So the next step was to actually drill the holes for attaching all the pages to the boards. I used a pump drill for this. A gimlet would have been used, which is kind of a sharp awl with points on it that allow you to drill through that. But pump drills would have been fairly common at this point, as well as bracing bit, which you can actually see by my foot on the floor. But the bit on that one's just too big for the work that we're doing on here. So this is actually a prototype that I haven't made the second pump drill for yet to replace this, so it still has some issues. So now that the boards are prepped, we can actually move on to actually sewing the pages in. So what I'm doing right here is I'm marking up with the board that I used. I'm marking onto a reference sheet, and then I'm going to take that reference sheet and I'm going to pierce all of the gatherings, so that's all the pages together. Each one of the gatherings I'm going to pierce at the right location using that guide sheet that I've used. And so I could build this out of, as a permanent, out of brass or out of wood or something like that. I could also use piercing cradle. But this technique works really well with a piece of cardstock since a lot of the books that I do really are one-offs. I'm only doing one at this exact size with this exact piercing pattern. So I'm now going to go through and do the same thing with all of the rest of them, and then I'm going to take and I'm going to sort and stack all of the gatherings. So this book actually only has two gatherings that have writing on them, and then a gathering at the front and the back that is the same thickness, that is just extra parchment to kind of bulk up the book and to give it some thickness in the hand, just because there's not that much text in it. And so I've lined them up and I made sure that they're in order, in the order I want them in. The next step is to actually carve channels for the chords so that they don't show too much on the outside of the finished book. So I did this with my scribe's knife. A chisel would work well for this as well. See me fighting it just a little bit. So once those are carved channels in both boards, then I proceed with stitching the pages on. So there's a very specific pattern with this stitching. But I decided to use a double thickness cord for it, double thickness bookbinder's thread, and then lightly waxed it by hand. The wax helps to hold the fibers down and helps to hold things together and make them stay stronger longer. The double thickness helps to bulk up the spine a little bit, but it also helps to give it some strength. And so I have to wrap around this spot. You can see the wrap around where that single hole is, and then stitch the first gathering on. This first gathering again is blank. I add a leather spacer, so this is actually a piece of the leather that I'm going to use to cover it in so that I have the right thickness spacing between the board and that first gathering so that things don't splay out weirdly when it's all done. I then finish stitching on and secure this first gathering. Make sure and put my leather spacer in as I tighten things up. That's kind of the key point, is to make sure that the spacer is in as I'm tightening each one. And then I add the rest of the gatherings on. So I put them there in order, add them on. I'm working from the back to the front. It doesn't really matter whether you work back to front or front to back, but with this Coptic bookbinding style, I really like to work back to front, just so that if I make any weird mistakes, it's in the back of the book. Again, this is a late Coptic bookbinding style. So there is no sewing frame, and everything is sewn directly onto the boards, and then each gathering is added on one at a time. And so that's the second gathering done. Skip through some spots, then we add the next two gatherings as well. It takes quite a bit of time just to get it right and to get all of the tension correctly, and to add each piece and make sure that they're lined up correctly. And so this is the last gathering. Once the last gathering goes on, then we have to attach that gathering. It goes on the same way as a normal one does. And then we add the front board, kind of in the same way that you would a gathering, where you go through the hole, but then we add a couple of loops around to secure it, and then move to the next hole and add loops. So here what I'm doing is I'm consolidating the spine. So I realized that my tension actually needs to be based on a spine that's been kind of pressed down a little bit. So I take the mallet and compress that a little bit, because I realized that it was not compressed all the way yet. Then I kind of go back through and can tighten up that a little bit and add the rest of the tension. So here's a different angle you can see as I come up from that gathering and run the needle through the hole. You can see that for some reason I'm not very good at that today. Add a couple of loops. And set my tension around that spacer again. That spacer really makes a difference when I'm stitching these in how the final book actually lays. So I'm tightening up with my awl, getting that tension correct. Breaking things, then I end up having to retie and do all of that, but it's just kind of part of the beast. And so then once I get everything fixed and stitched up, you can see that the pages are way extending beyond the book blocks, and we'll trim those later.